understood that voice inside me the moment I saw my mother's smile freeze at the edges. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that says, you're about to lose something you didn't even know was at risk. Maybe you felt it too. That hollow drop in your chest when someone you trusted looks at you like you're suddenly in their way. Like you're a complication they're calculating how to solve. Tell me if you've ever had to choose between family and self-respect. It started the way betrayal always does, quietly, with champagne and congratulations. They threw me a promotion party. My parents insisted, white tablecloths. Catered hors d'oeuvre. A cake with my name spelled out in gold fondant. Eleanor Hart, my mother, moved through the room like a conductor, air-kissing colleagues I barely knew, laughing too loud, her jewelry catching every angle of light. She loved an audience. She needed one. My father stood near the bar, checking his phone with the precision of a surgeon. Daniel Hart didn't do small talk, he did networks, leverage, outcomes. And Lucas, my younger brother, hung near the door like he was planning his escape before dessert even arrived. I should have known then. I stood in the center of that room, surrounded by people I didn't invite, celebrating a milestone I hadn't chosen to share, and I felt like a prop in someone else's production. My mother kept touching my shoulder every time someone took a photo. My father kept mentioning his company. Lucas wouldn't look at me. I remember thinking, this doesn't feel like my night. I was right. The party ended early. Lucas left without saying goodbye. My mother kissed my cheek and whispered, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," in that voice she used when other people were listening. My father shook my hand like I was a business partner he was trying to impress. And then, they were gone. I went home, poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop to check something I'd been meaning to review for weeks. My investment account, the one my grandmother set up for me when I was 8. The one I'd been contributing to for years. The one that was supposed to be untouchable until I turned 30. I logged in. The balance made my vision blur. $97,000. It should have been $432,000. I refreshed the page. Same number. I checked the transaction history. My hand started shaking before my brain could catch up. $335,000. Transferred. Authorized. Gone. The date was 2 weeks ago. I hadn't authorized anything. I scrolled down. There it was. A scanned document. A transfer approval form. My name typed neatly at the bottom. And beside it, a signature that looked close enough to mine that a bank might not question it. But I knew my own handwriting. That wasn't my signature. I zoomed in. The loops were wrong. The slant was off. Someone had practiced. Someone had tried. Someone had forged my name and walked away with everything my grandmother left me. Everything I'd saved. Everything I thought was mine. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen lighting my face, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not anger yet, not even shock. Just a cold, clarifying silence. I picked up my phone. Called Lucas. No answer. Called my mother. Voicemail. Called my father. Straight to voicemail. I pulled up the document again. Scrolled to the signature line. And there it was. A second name I hadn't noticed before. Co-signed by Eleanor Hart. My mother's signature. Real, confident, elegant. Right next to my forged one. I set the phone down slowly. My heartbeat felt distant, mechanical, like it belonged to someone else. They'd done this at my celebration, smiled at me, toasted me, hugged me for the camera. And the whole time, they already had my money. I stared at that signature until the screen went dark. And when I looked up, I wasn't the same person who'd blown out candles an hour before. I was someone who finally understood the difference between being loved and being useful. That was the night I stopped waiting for an apology. I called Lucas 17 times before he finally answered. His voice came through tight and hollow, like he'd been holding his breath for days. He said my name once. Just once. And I knew he'd been waiting for this call the same way you wait for a storm you can see coming but can't outrun. I didn't ask if he was free. I told him where to meet me. A coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment. Neutral ground. Public enough that he couldn't run. Quiet enough that no one would hear him break. He arrived looking smaller than I remembered. My younger brother. 24 years old. The golden child. The one our parents paraded through every family photo like a trophy they'd earned. He wore a gray hoodie and kept his hands in his pockets. His eyes were red-rimmed. Exhausted. We sat across from each other at a corner table. the kind with scratched laminate and wobbly legs. I didn't order anything. Neither did he. I slid my phone across the table. The screen showed the transfer document, my forged signature, our mother's real one, the account number I didn't recognize. Lucas looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he closed his eyes. And he broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a slow, quiet collapse. His shoulders curved inward. His breathing went shallow. He pressed his palms flat on the table, like he was trying to hold himself together through the surface. He said, "I thought you knew." 4 words, soft as a confession, sharp as a blade. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage yet, just clarity. The kind that comes when a puzzle piece you didn't know was missing finally clicks into place. He told me everything. 2 months ago, our father pulled him into his office, closed the door, told him the family needed his help. Temporary financial restructuring, tax strategy. Nothing illegal, nothing permanent. Just moving assets around to protect the estate, protect all of us. Dad said I'd already agreed, that I'd signed off on everything, that this was a formality, a legal safety measure, and Lucas just needed to open an account under his name to facilitate the transfer. Lucas asked why they needed him. Why not handle it themselves? Dad looked him in the eye and said, "Because your sister trusts you, and the banks trust young account holders more than old ones. This protects her too." So Lucas signed, opened the account, watched $335,000 flow in, watched it flow out 2 days later, asked where it went. Dad said, "It's handled, don't worry about it." Mom said, "You did the right thing, sweetheart, you're protecting this family." And Lucas believed them, because that's what we were raised to do, believe, obey. Trust that they knew better. Trust that love meant loyalty, and loyalty meant silence. He looked at me then. His eyes were wet. His voice cracked. He said, "I kept the documents, I don't know why, something felt wrong, and I couldn't throw them away." He pulled a manila envelope from his backpack, slid it across the table, his hands were shaking. Inside were copies, bank statements, transfer receipts, authorization forms, wire instructions, and something else. Something I hadn't seen yet. A second account. My name, my social security number, an account opened 6 months ago, an account I never touched, never heard of, never authorized. The balance was 0, but the transaction history told a story. Money in, money out, routing numbers I didn't recognize. Dates that lined up with family dinners, holiday visits, Sunday brunches where Mom kissed my cheek and Dad asked about my career like he cared. They'd been using my identity, not just my inheritance, me, my name, my credit, my legal existence. I sat there holding those pages, and I felt my pulse in my fingertips. Slow, steady, cold. Lucas was crying now, quietly, his shoulders shook. He kept saying he was sorry, that he didn't know, that he thought he was helping. And I believed him. Because that's what they did. They didn't just steal. They weaponized love, turned loyalty into a trap, made you complicit before you even knew there was a crime. I reached across the table, took his hand, squeezed once. I said, "This isn't your fault." He looked at me like I'd just given him oxygen. I said, "But I need you to tell me everything, every conversation, every document, every lie they told you." He nodded, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he talked. He told me about the late-night phone calls, the meetings he wasn't supposed to mention, the way Dad would pull him aside at family events and remind him that discretion was a virtue, the way Mom would text him after, saying how proud she was, how mature he'd become, how much he was growing into the man they always knew he'd be. He told me about the offshore account, the one Dad mentioned once, casually, like it was common knowledge, the one tied to the pharmaceutical company, the one that was supposed to be temporary. Lucas asked what it was for. Dad said it was restructuring debt, legal strategy, nothing to worry about. But Lucas wasn't stupid. He'd seen the news, the environmental lawsuits, the investor complaints, the whispers about financial instability. He just didn't think his own father would use him as a pawn. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the envelope. My hands were steady now. My heartbeat felt distant, mechanical. I stood up. Lucas looked at me like he was afraid I'd walk away and never speak to him again. I said, "I'm going to fix this, and you're going to help me." He nodded, fast, desperate. I said, "But first, I need you to do something for me." He straightened, wiped his face again. His voice was raw, but steady. He said, anything. I leaned down, close enough that only he could hear me. I said, I need you to stop protecting them. His breath caught. I said, they used you, they used me, and they'll do it again if we let them. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my brother, instead of the role our parents had cast him in. He nodded. I walked out of that coffee shop with the envelope tucked under my arm and a phone call to make. I called Priya. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, alert. She always knew when something was wrong. I said, I need you to run a trace on an account number. She didn't ask why. She just said, send it to me. I did, right there on the sidewalk. Forwarded every document Lucas had given me, every page, every transaction, every lie. Priya called back 14 minutes later. She said, Maya, where are you? I said, walking home. Why? She said, stop walking, sit down. I stopped, sat on a bench outside a bookstore. The evening air was cool. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on. Priya's voice went quiet, the kind of quiet that means the ground is about to shift. She said, that second account, the one under your name. I said, what about it? She said, it's not closed, it's active. And there's a transfer scheduled for tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped. I said, how much? She said, 80,000. Wired to the same offshore account tied to your father's company. I felt the bench beneath me, the cold metal, the rough wood. The world kept moving around me. Cars, people, light, sound. But I was perfectly still. I said, they're still doing it. Priya said, they never stopped. I sat there, breathing, thinking, calculating. And then I smiled. Not a happy smile, not a kind one. The kind of smile that comes when you finally understand the game. When you stop playing defense. When you realize the people who taught you to be gentle never planned to return the favor. I said, can you stop the transfer? Priya said, I can do better than that. I can trace where it's going, build a paper trail, document everything. I said, do it. She paused. Then she said, Maya, what are you planning? I looked up at the sky. The stars were just starting to appear. Faint, steady, constant. I said, I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve. Priya laughed. Low, sharp. The sound of someone who'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. She said, I'll start tonight. I hung up, stood, walked home with the envelope pressed against my ribs like armor. And for the first time since I saw that empty account balance, I didn't feel small. I felt sharp. Some doors closed softly. Others slam behind you like a warning you should have heard years ago. The invitation came wrapped in my mother's handwriting, delivered like a gift I hadn't asked for. She texted me at 7 a.m, calm, measured, the kind of message that pretends yesterday never happened. It said, sweetheart, let's talk. Just the three of us. Tonight at the house. We can clear this up. Clear this up like I'd misunderstood a dinner reservation. Like they hadn't forged my signature and drained my future while smiling for cameras. I stared at that text for 5 full minutes. Watched the words blur and refocus. Felt the old pull, the instinct to apologize, to smooth things over, to be the daughter who made everything easier. Then I called Priya. She answered before the second ring. Her voice was coffee sharp and already suspicious. She said, what did they do now? I read her the text. Priya was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, you're not going alone. I said, I have to. They won't talk if anyone else is there. She said, then you're wearing a wire. I laughed. It came out darker than I expected. I said, I don't have a wire. Priya said, you have a phone. Open it on a call with me. Leave it in your pocket. Let me hear everything. I sat on the edge of my bed. The morning light came through the window in pale stripes. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was not. I said, what if they search me? Priya said, they won't. Because they still think you're the obedient one. They think you're coming to apologize. She was right. I said, okay. She said, Maya, if anything feels wrong, if they threaten you, if they so much as raise their voices. I said, I'll leave. She said, promise me. I said, I promise. But we both knew I was lying. I arrived at the house just after sunset, the same house I grew up in, the same driveway where I learned to ride a bike. The same front door I'd walked through 1,000 times, carrying report cards and prom photos, and the weight of being almost good enough. The house looked exactly the same. Pristine, expensive, cold. I parked on the street, checked my phone. Priya had already called me. The line was open, silent. Waiting. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket, screen facing out, microphone exposed. Then I walked up the stone pathway and rang the doorbell like a guest. My mother answered. She looked perfect, hair swept into a low bun, cashmere sweater, pearl earrings, the kind of elegance that photographed well and felt like armor. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes but looked convincing in mirrors. She said, "Maya, come in, sweetheart." I stepped inside. The air smelled like expensive candles and furniture polish. Everything was in its place. Everything gleamed. My father stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, posture straight. He looked at me the way he looked at quarterly reports. Assessing, calculating, already 3 steps ahead. He said, "Thank you for coming." I didn't sit. Neither did they. We stood in a triangle, 3 points, no escape routes. My mother folded her hands in front of her, graceful, controlled. She said, "We know you're upset." Upset, like I'd lost a parking space, like this was a feeling that would pass if I just breathed through it. I said nothing. My father cleared his throat. His voice was measured, reasonable, the tone he used in boardrooms when he needed people to believe him. He said, "There's been a misunderstanding. We were handling some complex financial restructuring, tax strategy, estate planning. It's all very technical, and we should have explained it better." My mother nodded, sympathetic, concerned. She said, "We never meant to worry you, darling. This was all for your benefit, to protect your assets, to make sure everything stays in the family." I felt the phone press against my ribs, felt Priya listening, felt the walls close in and expand at the same time. I said, "I didn't sign anything." My father's expression didn't change, didn't even flicker. He said, "Of course you did. Months ago. We went over everything together. You must have forgotten." My mother touched my arm, light, gentle, the kind of touch that looked loving from a distance. She said, "Sweetheart, you've been under so much stress. The promotion, the long hours. It's understandable if some details slipped your mind." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, looked at her face, the perfectly applied makeup, the practiced concern. I said I didn't forget, because I never signed. The room went quiet, not peaceful, tense, like the air before lightning. My father's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. He said, "Maya, we're trying to be patient, but you're being unreasonable." My mother's hand dropped from my arm. Her voice stayed soft, but the warmth drained out of it like water through a sieve. She said, "We've always taken care of you, given you everything, and this is how you repay us? With accusations?" I felt something shift inside me. A lock turning, a door closing. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, the one Lucas gave me, the one with copies of everything. I set it on the coffee table between us. I said, "I had the signatures analyzed, forensically, by a professional." The silence that followed was different, sharper, colder. My father looked at the folder, then at me. His eyes went flat. My mother's smile finally disappeared. Her face hardened, smooth as marble, just as cold. She said, "You what?" I said, "The signature on the transfer authorization isn't mine. It's a forgery, a good one, but not good enough." My father's voice dropped, low, dangerous. He said, "You're making a very serious accusation." I said, "I'm stating a fact." My mother laughed. It was a terrible sound, brittle, sharp, nothing like the one she used at parties. She said, "This is ridiculous. You're being paranoid, irrational. We're your parents, Maya. We wouldn't." I said, "You used Lucas." That stopped her. Her mouth opened, closed. Her eyes flickered to my father. I said, "You told him I knew, that I'd agreed. You made him complicit. You turned him into a tool." My father stepped forward. Just one step. But it felt like a threat. He said, "Lucas is fine. He's part of this family. He understands what that means." I said, "He understands you lied to him." My mother's voice went cold, surgical. She said, "You need to be very careful what you say next, Maya. Family loyalty goes both ways, and right now you're on very thin ice." I felt the phone in my pocket, felt Priya on the other end, listening, recording, witnessing. I said, "I'm not the one who should be worried about loyalty." My father's face went hard. His voice turned to steel. He said, "You have no idea what you're talking about. That money was necessary. For the company. For all of us. You think you can just waltz in here and—" My mother cut him off. Smooth. Fast. She said, "What your father means is that these are complicated adult matters. You're young. You don't understand the pressures we're under, the responsibilities." I said, "I understand theft." The word landed like a stone through glass. My mother's face went white, then red, then something worse, empty. She said, "How dare you?" My father said, "We gave you everything, this house, your education, your opportunities, and you stand here and call us thieves?" I said, "You forged my signature. You drained my account. You used my identity to open accounts I never authorized. What would you call it?" My mother's voice rose, sharp, shrill, the mask finally cracking. She said, "You ungrateful little—" My phone buzzed in my pocket, once, hard. A text from Priya. I didn't need to look at it to know what it said. But I pulled out my phone anyway. My parents went silent, watching. I read the text. It said, "You're not going to believe where your money actually went. Get out now." I looked up, met my father's eyes, then my mother's. I said, "This conversation is over." My mother stepped forward. Her voice turned pleading, desperate. She said, "Maya, wait, please. Let's just talk about this. We can fix." I said no. My father's voice went cold, final. He said, "If you walk out that door, you're making a choice. You understand that? A permanent one." I picked up the folder, held it against my chest. I said, "I've already made it." I walked to the door. My mother called after me. Her voice was breaking now, real emotion finally. But it was too late, years too late. She said, "Where are your parents? You can't just—" I turned, one last time. I said, "You stopped being my parents the moment you decided I was something you could use." I walked out. Closed the door behind me. Heard my mother's voice rise to a shriek inside. Heard my father's low, furious tone cutting her off. I got in my car. Started the engine. Pulled out my phone. Priya was still on the line. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine. What did you find?" Priya's voice went quiet. Serious. She said, "Maya, your money didn't just go to Lucas's account. It went through 3 different transfers. Shell companies. Routing numbers in the Caymans. And it all ended up in the same place." I said, "Where?" She said, "An offshore account tied directly to your father's pharmaceutical company. The one with the environmental lawsuits. The one bleeding investors." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She said, "He's using your inheritance to cover up fraud, illegal dumping, falsified safety reports. He's about to go down, Maya, and he tried to take you with him." I sat there, engine running, house lights glowing behind me in the rearview mirror. I said, "How much time do we have?" Priya said, "He's giving a presentation to the investor board tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He's going to announce a financial turnaround. Show them proof the company is stable." I said, "Proof he doesn't have." Priya said, "Proof he stole from you." I looked at the house one more time, the perfect lawn, the perfect facade, the perfect lie. I said, "Can you prove it, all of it, in a way that holds up?" Priya's voice went sharp, focused. She said, "I already have. Documents. Transaction records. Forensic trails. Everything." I said, "How fast can you move?" She said, "How fast do you want me to?" I smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a forgiving one. The kind of smile that comes when you finally stop being afraid of the fire and decide to light the match yourself. I said, "Before sunrise." Priya said, "Maya, are you sure?" I looked at the house. The windows glowing warm, the curtains drawn, the secrets trapped inside like smoke. I said, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She said, "Then let's burn it down." I hung up, put the car in drive, and I left that house behind for the last time. Because some fires don't destroy, they clarify, they purify, they show you exactly who people were all along. And sometimes the only way forward is to let everything behind you turn to ash. The world didn't end with a whisper. It ended with headlines and cameras and my father's face going white under conference room lights. I watched it happen from Priya's apartment, Lucas beside me. Coffee gone cold in our hands. The live stream playing on her laptop like a documentary we'd written ourselves. My father walked into that boardroom at 9:53. I recognized his suit. Navy. Expensive. The one he wore when he needed to project confidence, authority, control. He shook hands with the board members. Smiled. That practiced smile that never reached his eyes but photographed well in annual reports. He didn't know yet. The emails had been sent, the evidence delivered. But he hadn't checked his phone, hadn't seen the alerts, hadn't felt the ground shift beneath him. He walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, pulled up his presentation on the screen behind him. The title slide said, Heart Pharmaceuticals, Q4 Financial Review and Future Outlook. He started talking. His voice was steady, measured. The voice of a man who'd spent 40 years convincing people to trust him. He talked about quarterly earnings, revenue projections, market expansion, strategic investments. He lied with the ease of someone who'd been doing it so long he'd forgotten what truth felt like. And then the door opened. A woman in a gray suit walked in, fast, purposeful. She handed a folder to the chairman of the board, whispered something in his ear. The chairman's face changed, went from polite attention to something harder, colder. My father kept talking. He hadn't noticed yet. Or maybe he had and was trying to push through, trying to finish before the wave crashed. The chairman stood up, raised his hand. He said something we couldn't hear through the live stream, but we saw my father's face, saw the confusion, then the irritation, then the first flicker of fear. The chairman said something else, gestured to the folder, gestured to the door. My father's face went from white to gray to something worse. He saw it then, the end, coming for him like a train he'd been standing in front of all along. Lucas whispered, "Oh my God." Priya leaned forward, her eyes locked on the screen. The chairman opened the folder, started reading. We couldn't hear the words, but we saw the impact. Saw the other board members lean forward, saw their faces change. Confusion turning to shock, turning to fury. My father tried to speak. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The chairman held up a hand, silencing him. More people entered the room. Security, lawyers, journalists who'd somehow gotten wind of the story and showed up with cameras. The live stream cut to another angle. A news camera outside the building. Reporters gathering. Microphones. Questions being shouted. One reporter was already on air. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Breaking Heart Pharmaceuticals, CEO, accused of fraud. We watched my father be escorted from the podium, not gently, not with respect, like a problem being removed from a space it no longer belonged in. He tried to maintain his composure, tried to walk with his head up, but his hands were shaking. His face had lost all color. The cameras followed him all the way to the exit. Lucas turned away from the screen, pressed his hands against his face. He said, "I can't believe this is real." I said, "It's real." Priya pulled up another window. Social media. The story was everywhere, trending, exploding. Heart Pharmaceuticals, fraud, environmental violations, embezzlement. My father's name, again and again. And then my mother's. The articles were detailed, specific. They had documents, screenshots, the forensic analysis of the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the trail of money from my inheritance to his company. They had everything, because we'd given it to them. Priya's phone rang. She answered. Put it on speaker. A woman's voice. Professional, careful. She identified herself as an attorney from the legal recovery team we'd contacted. She said the evidence was solid, that they were filing for full restitution, that criminal charges were being pursued against both my parents. She said we'd get every dollar back, plus damages, plus legal fees. She said it would take time, but justice was coming. Priya thanked her, hung up. The three of us sat in silence. The news played on mute, my father's face frozen on the screen mid-escort, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Lucas said, "What about Mom?" As if summoned by the question, another alert appeared. A society column, the kind my mother used to read every morning with her coffee. The headline read, Eleanor Hart removed from museum board amid fraud scandal. I clicked on it. The article was brief but devastating. It detailed her involvement in the scheme, her role coordinating the transfers, her signature on the documents, her carefully maintained image crumbling like sugar glass. It mentioned her resignation from every board she'd sat on, every charity she'd chaired, every social position she'd cultivated for 30 years. It mentioned the friends who'd already distanced themselves, the invitations being rescinded, The phone calls going unreturned. My mother's empire, built on appearances and connections and the careful performance of perfection. Gone. Not gradually, not with dignity, but all at once, publicly, permanently. Lucas read the article over my shoulder. His breathing went shallow. He said, "She's gonna blame us." I said, "She should blame herself." He looked at me. His eyes were red but clear. He said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. I said, "I think I will be." The calls kept coming. Journalists, lawyers, investigators, people asking for statements, for interviews, for our side of the story. Priya handled them all, calm, professional, protecting us while making sure the truth stayed visible. 3 days later, Lucas and I met with federal investigators. We gave our statements, showed them the documents, walked them through every lie, every manipulation, every crime. Lucas testified about the pressure, the way our father framed it as family duty, the way our mother praised him for his compliance. I testified about the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, the fake account opened in my name. The investigators recorded everything, took notes, promised follow-up. When we left, Lucas stopped on the steps outside the federal building. The sun was bright, cold, winter trying to decide if it was ready to let go. He said, "I don't know how to do this." I said, "Do what?" He said, "Exist without them. Without the family, without the structure." I looked at him, my younger brother, the golden child who'd just walked away from everything he was raised to protect. I said, "You learn, one day at a time, and you remember that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when everything falls apart." He nodded, wiped his eyes. He said, "I'm sorry, for everything, for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting you." I said, "You were a victim too." He said, "But you got hurt worse." I said, "And I survived. We both did." We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd been raised in the same house but lived in different worlds. Finally seeing each other clearly. He said, "What happens now?" I said, "Now we build something they can't touch." 6 weeks later, the legal recovery was complete. Every dollar returned, plus damages, plus interest, plus penalties. My inheritance, restored, larger than it had been before. I sat in Priya's office, the check on the desk between us, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. She said, "What are you going to do with it?" I didn't hesitate. I said, "Start a foundation. Environmental accountability, protecting communities from companies like my father's, making sure what he did to those people never happens again." Priya smiled, sharp, proud. She said, "That's perfect." I said, "It's necessary." Lucas joined the foundation as its first volunteer coordinator, not because he had to, not because I asked, but because he wanted to build something that mattered, something clean. We worked together, not as the children of Daniel and Eleanor Hart, but as people who'd survived them, who'd chosen truth over loyalty, who'd walked away from a burning house and decided to build something fireproof. The criminal trials took months. My parents hired expensive lawyers, tried every defense, blamed each other, blamed us, blamed the system. It didn't matter. The evidence was too clear, the paper trail too obvious, the victims too numerous. My father was sentenced to 8 years. Fraud, environmental violations, identity theft. My mother got 6. Conspiracy, forgery, aiding and abetting. They appealed, lost. They wrote letters. I didn't read them. They asked for visits. I didn't go. Because forgiveness isn't something you owe to people who used you as collateral damage in their own corruption. And family isn't a cage you're required to stay in just because someone else built it. I saw my mother once more, by accident, outside a courthouse. She was getting into a car. Her hair was different, no longer perfect. Her clothes were expensive but worn. Her face looked older, harder, hollow. She saw me. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she might say something, apologize, explain, beg. But she just looked at me like I was a stranger who'd stolen something that belonged to her. Then she got in the car and left. And I felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, not vindication. Just the quiet peace that comes when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to hold. Lucas and I had dinner that night, at a small restaurant neither of our parents would ever have chosen. Too casual, too unpretentious, too real. He raised his glass. He said, "To starting over." I clinked my glass against his. I said, "To building something better." We drank, ate, talked about the foundation, about the communities we were helping, about the lives being protected because we'd chosen to speak up. We talked about everything except them, because they didn't get to be the center of our story anymore. They were just the chapter we survived. The epilogue happened quietly, without ceremony, without fanfare. The foundation grew. We hired staff, opened offices, funded research, supported whistleblowers, held corporations accountable. We named it the Hartwell Foundation, close enough to our family name to feel like reclamation, different enough to feel like freedom. People ask me sometimes if I regretted it, exposing my parents, destroying the family, walking away. I told them the truth. You don't lose a family when you walk away from people who abused you. You gain a life they can no longer ruin. You gain the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. You gain the knowledge that love isn't supposed to feel like a trap. And you gain the freedom to build something real, something honest, something that doesn't require you to be small so someone else can feel powerful. I stood in the foundation's new office 6 months after it opened. Floor-to-ceiling windows, natural light, plants, the kind of space that felt alive instead of sterile. Lucas was at his desk. Priya was on a call. The team was working, focused, purpose-driven. I looked out the window at the city moving below. Cars, people, light, life continuing the way it always had. But I was different. Not broken, not bitter, not defined by what was taken from me. Just free. Free to choose who I became. Free to build something that mattered. Free to walk away from people who loved control more than they loved me. And sometimes freedom looks like fire, like burning down everything you were taught to protect, so you can finally see what's worth saving. Sometimes it looks like ending, like loss, like the death of the family you thought you had. But it's not death. It's transformation. It's the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space and start building the life you were always meant to live. My phone buzzed. A text from Lucas. It said, "Community meeting went well. We're funding 3 new projects. You were right. This matters." I smiled, texted back. It always did. I put my phone away, turned back to the office, to the work, to the life I'd built from the ashes of the one they tried to burn. And I knew with absolute certainty I'd made the right choice. Because sometimes the family you lose wasn't family at all. It was just people who mistook your love for permission. And the day you stop giving them that permission is the day you finally come home to yourself.